The European Union was planned long before the name was even mentioned, long before even the European Economic Community was mentioned. It goes way back. It involves the House of Rothschild, of course. If anything is happening of serious manipulation and conspiracy, then the House of Rothschild will be in there at operational level. And one of the other so-called elite families is the Habsburgs, and of course Otto von Habsburg has been involved in the manipulation of the European Union, is now for long before, like I say, it was ever mentioned. The idea is very simple. If you are the few and you want to control the many, you have to centralize decision-making. You have to centralize power. The more points of decision-making you have, the more diversity of decision-making, the less power any small cabal is going to have at the center. So the idea has been over not just hundreds of years, but thousands of years, to incessantly centralize power, to centralize decision-making. If you think back a little way, humanity was assembled, if you like, in tribes, where there were lots of tribes in these different areas of land, and the tribes were making decisions over what happened in the tribe. Then came the first major centralization operation, and that was when they turned large numbers of these tribes into different nations. And of course then you've got a situation where now a few people at the center of the nation are dictating to all the previous tribes. What the European Union is, and of course they have plans for similar structures all over the world, like they've got the African Union, they want the North American Union to be the American Union, they want the Asia-Pacific Union, but the European Union is the blueprint. And this was the next stage where they started bringing the nations together under centralized control. So now a few literal bureaucrats in Brussels are dictating to the nations of Europe. The next stage from that is a world government which would dictate to the unions. And so, as with all of these manipulations of society, you see the outcome at some point. Like now we've got this Lisbon Treaty and, in effect, a United States of Europe. But that's the outcome as it is at the moment. Actually, it started decades and decades and decades ago, way back in the early part of the 20th century, when all this thing was kind of orchestrated. And one of the, of course, major frontmen of the creation of the European community was Jean Monnet, who was just, and again, a frontman for these families, who was used as the orchestrator and the administrator into existence of this European economic community as it was. And he wrote to a friend in the year I was born. We're talking nearly 60 years ago, 57 years ago. And he was saying that the idea is not to tell anybody, basically, that what we want is a centralized superstate, in effect. But what we'll do is we'll keep incessantly moving towards that and give an economic excuse for why the different stages of more and more centralization are justified until, as you put it, you basically pass a point where there's no return. And in effect, barring a colossal revolution, we are, in the present state of things anyway, past the point of no return. And it's just been a classic case of what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, where you start at A, you know you're going to Z, but you know if you go in gigantic leaps, then the change is so dramatic and quick that people look up and ask what's going on. So you make your leaps as much as you can get away with, but not so far that there's a big kind of reaction and acknowledgement that something very different is going on here. And they've done it brilliantly. But the way they played it in more recent times is to deny the public an opportunity to have a decision or make a decision in referendums, etc., on the incessant centralization of power that we've been seeing. because more and more people are beginning, in fact, well past beginning, to look at the European Union, the way it's going, and feel great unease about it. We saw this with the no votes for the Constitution in the Netherlands and in France, and that was a big wake-up call to the manipulators, because they realized that if you give people the opportunity to say yes or no to this creation of this United States of Europe, then overwhelmingly you're going to get a no. That is why they simply changed the name of the Constitution to the treaty and kept 98% or something of the Constitution in the treaty. It was an excuse, clearly, blatantly, obviously, not to have a rerun of the French and Dutch referendums, because they knew they would say no again, and not to have to give a referendum in the UK, where we would have massively said no, no question. The arrogance and the agenda of this cabal is such that public opinion is totally and utterly irrelevant. And if public opinion is going to say what you don't want it to say, then you do not give public opinion the chance to say it. In Ireland, of course, thanks to the Irish Constitution, they had to have a referendum on this treaty. And the Irish said no. What happens then is we can't call it something else, so we've got to get the Irish to turn over that decision. Now, you see, in a normal course of events, you have a referendum. The referendum decides, and everyone gets on with their lives. And if that referendum, that first one in Ireland, had have said yes to the treaty, that is exactly what would have happened. But as I've said many times over the years, if it's the agenda, it doesn't take no for an answer. And so you know when it's the agenda, because it will not accept the outcome of a public referendum. So we have the second one. What happens then is they go to town big time on all the areas they need to change to get a different vote. One of the things that happened in Ireland, outrageously, was the people that decide media policy and media balance policy and media bias policy in Ireland decided that in the second referendum, the television stations and the media didn't have to give equal time to the yes or no vote. They just had to give basically equal time to each party. And as only one party, Sinn Féin, was wanting to vote no, of course the massive yes vote got, arena rather, got all the coverage. And to be honest, if that vote had not been genuinely no, and some people think it wasn't, then they would have made it so by manipulating the votes anyway, and manipulating the count, because these people will not take no for an answer. So what we now have is a situation, outrageously, where a group of unelected bureaucrats in Brussels, appointed by other bureaucrats, controlled by the elite family network, are now going to decide on the policy and the structure of European society. And for those Irish people who genuinely voted yes to it, and those young people I saw jumping up and down with joy, like a goal had been scored in a cup final when the vote came through yes. If you ever watch this, you people that did that, you are going to regret what you did for the rest of your life. Because what's going to happen now, and we're already seeing it, Henrik, is once this power is secured, we've only got the Czech Republic now to go through it, etc. we are going to see the speed of European central control just be unleashed. This European control system, as we speak, is like a series of 100-meter runners at the start of an Olympic 100-meter final. It's like, on your marks, get set, and now they're waiting. And as soon as this control system is through and this treaty is all intact, the gun's going to go off. And in all directions, massive centralization of power, dictatorship from the center is going to happen. We're going to see things like a European database where all the countries pull their database. We're going to see European laws, European law enforcement, etc., etc. And you people in Ireland, good on you who voted no. But you voted yes. Young people, I'm afraid the celebrations are going to be very short. Because you know what the Irish have done, those that voted yes? They've voted to never have the option of voting again. Because what this means is, from now on, with the changes in the structure, we have literally a European government that has almost total power. And when you think that even now, before the treaty comes in, something like 75% of laws in the UK originate in the European Union, well, what's going to happen now? And it's been coming a long time, and some people have seen it, and some people have been watching the soap and the sports.
Speaking about law, the law text of the European Union, or the body of the law, acquis communautaire, or whatever is the French term, probably butchering that, but anyway, it contains about 80,000 pages of law, according to some sources. Then this UK think tank, which is critical of the European Union, called Open Europe, recently did a check on this and claimed that it actually is 170,000 pages long, the body of the law in the European Union. So with that, having said that, the New World Order pretty much is potentially not the crackdown that we first might have thought it was, with tear gas and tasers, batons, rubber bullets, what have you, advanced technology, so-called non-lethal weapons and so forth. Okay, that happens now and again, like in Pittsburgh, but generally it seems like the New World Order is more about rules, regulations, bylaws, do's and don'ts, ink and paper, and in a way, in the future panopticon, if you will, even to make a move or to be able to do something, you have to file a motion or turn in a paper or something like that. And that seems to be what is happening right now. We're being entangled in this web of laws, pretty much. Maybe you can comment on that.
Well, the web of laws is a very good term, because I have an image that an artist friend of mine, Neil Haig, knocked out for me and produced for me, which I use in my talks, which is of a spider's web with the spider entangling human beings in the web. And it's a very good analogy, because what you're looking at is, in all areas of human activity, the do's and don'ts are coming closer and closer, becoming more and more fine detail. And the point is to tangle you to the web like a fly to the web, so you can't move. And of course, ludicrously detailed bureaucracy is part of that. I spoke in Croatia a couple of times in the last couple of years, who are in the process of negotiating entry to the European Union. And I was saying there that it's like tanks and troops all lining up on your border, and they're waiting to invade as soon as they're given the go-ahead, and then the invasion comes. But the point I was making is that invasion is not troops and it's not tanks. It's bureaucracy. It is laws, rules and regulations dictating the fine detail of your lives. And I was pointing out, you may think, oh yeah, join the European Union, it's everything good, and everybody else is in it. Look, 1 year after Croatia joined, if that, they'll be going, We didn't agree to this. What's going on? European law, mate. Well, you can't do that. We've never done European law, mate. And this whole thing about legislation and law is very, very important, because what they do is, first of all, meanings of words are different in the way they are used in legislation than they're used in everyday life. Therefore, what appears to say something, if you read it, says something else in legalese. And the other thing is, as you point out from your question, is they explode these words and clauses and subclauses across pages and pages and pages of legislation. And the politicians who vote for it have never read it. We've got a guy in, this is just one example, it's a pathetic example, but it's a very good one, called Kenneth Clarke, who is in the Conservative Party and was in the Conservative government of Margaret Thatcher and others, who actually said openly on BBC Radio, while campaigning for the Maastricht Treaty, which was a big step towards where we are, he openly said on the radio that he'd not read the Maastricht Treaty. And so what happens is, and this is not just in the European Union legislation, it's done in all legislation, that they vote for it, and then something will happen. Oh, I didn't vote for that. Yeah, oh, over here. Get your glasses on. Right. Look down here. Subclause 7, stroke 3. There it is. I voted for you. Voted for that. You didn't read it, but you voted for it. And this is one of the key reasons for political parties. It's an important area, this is. If we voted for people on the basis of their character, then there is no unifying force once they get to Parliament to get them to vote in blocks. So we don't want, in terms of this cabal, they don't want independent politicians. They had to find a way, they've long done it of course, of herding them together where they could be centrally controlled. So they introduced this whole idea of parties, a political version of the European Union. I guess if you look at its structure, you've now got a group of people who are answerable to a leader. And the leader then, and the leadership, and those in the shadows behind the leadership, dictate how all the people in that party, in a so-called democratic free country, are going to vote in relation to some legislation or other. And then there's the carrot and the stick, that if there's rebels who will not vote as the leadership says, then they know that their political careers in terms of rising up the ranks is going to be severely curtailed. Because they know that, the politicians in the party who are there for power, there for prestige, they're not there through values, they will toe the party line and vote for legislation they've not read, and even if they did, they didn't agree with, but they'll vote for it anyway. And so we have this system in Britain, the whip system, they have it in most other countries too, of course, where these guys from the parties go round and threaten people in their own party if they don't vote with the party line. So what this means is that we have this ludicrous idea that we live in a free country because of a democracy, as if freedom and democracy is the same thing, when actually the whole thing is stitched up so that people vote in the desired manner. And we need a totally different look and perception of how humans organize themselves, because at the moment they don't organize themselves. They're being organized from the center in an increasingly fierce and dictatorial way.
You touched a little bit on the Lisbon Treaty, obviously. The Irish voted yes. Either they were scared into submission because of the economic situation, which is happening right now, or maybe the 2.4 billion pro-European propaganda euros, tax funded, by the way, Maybe those worked its charm on the Irish people as well. And there's a number of things now that are going to be implemented under the Lisbon Treaty. And there's two things, maybe if you can comment on this. One of them is the death penalty in the EU in the case of war, riots, and upheaval, whatever that actually means, upheaval. And also the potential upcoming future president, unelected president of the European Union. Some say Tony Blair, recently converted to Catholicism and all that, the whole background story on that guy, war criminal, liar.
If Tony Blair converted to humanity, it would be a start. He's not managed it yet.
What's your take on the implementation of the Lisbon Treaty and these things? Mentioned death penalty and Tony Blair. Do you think that they will be implemented and enforced? Do you think Tony will get in as well?
Well, I think that's the way it seems to be going. And different people like Sarkozy, who I wouldn't trust to tell me the time in a room full of clocks, and Berlusconi, both of which are close associates of Tony Blair, because they're all in the cabal. They're pushing him, and Tony Blair is the classic frontman for this whole conspiracy, because he has no values, he has no sense of decency, he has no empathy with the consequences for others of his actions. And wherever he has been in power, war has followed. The 10 years that he was in power as Prime Minister of Britain, he took the country into war after war, in league with the United States. Both countries controlled by the House of Rothschild. That's why they move as one unit. And it's why Israel and Mossad move as one unit with America and Britain, because that's one of the great fiefdoms of the House of Rothschild. It's all comes back to them at operational level in the end. And so Tony Blair will implement anything that he's told to implement. He's the ultimate yes sir, no sir, anything you say, sir. And of course, at the moment, after his time as Prime Minister and before he probably becomes the President of Europe, he's had payback. He has been given enormous amounts of money for doing nothing in terms of advising J.P. Morgan Chase, phenomenal amounts of money for sycophantic, bland, say-nothing speeches. And he's getting payback for services rendered when he was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and did whatever he was told. We had a situation when he was Prime Minister where even when members of the Cabinet resigned in various situations, sometimes in protest over the Iraq War, where they actually said there was no cabinet government in Britain because those in the shadows were basically making the decisions through Blair, and what the rest of the government decided or thought was irrelevant. And now, if he becomes the President of Europe, if you look at his track record, you look at the people behind him, you look at what the agenda is in terms of a third world war to complete the process to world government, world central bank, world army and all this stuff, he will take the European Union into a war. I mean, he knows no other way. And so the very fact that this was pointed out to the Irish people, what you're voting yes for is almost certainly this valueless, lying cheat to become, in effect, your head of state. And they still voted yes. Turkey's voting for Christmas. And Christmas is coming, by the way.
One of the things that kind of I'm currently working on, so to speak, in terms of the film that we're working on, is a theory, rather, at this point. Some of the evidence seems to point out that the European Union is basically the recreation of the Roman Empire, or the Holy Roman Empire, pretty much.
Yep.
The Lisbon Treaty documents, once they are signed, are, for instance, they're lodged in Rome. The major step forward in the EU back in '57 was, of course, the signing of the Treaty of
Rome, yeah.
Tony Blair converted to Catholicism, again, potentially becoming the first president. Otto von Habsburg, the Pan-European Union, seems to favor a Catholic, or at least a Christianized, anti-capitalist European Union.
Based on the Constantine
Creed, or
the Constantine time, where of course Constantine the Great was the head of the Holy Roman Empire, which is, you're quite right, they want to create. And Otto von Habsburg even uses the name Constantine when he's talking about what he would like the European Union to become. And he wants a president for life, not just a president for a specific number of years.
And continuing on from that, many of the so-called founding fathers of the EU, you mentioned Monnet before, Robert Schuman, Konrad Adenauer, Joseph Beck, Alcide de Gasperi, Paul Henry Spaak. They've all been in some kind of accordance with Christian Democrats, Christian Social Democrats, or Catholics. Some of them are Jesuit trained and so forth. So to you, is that evidence that at the core the European Union is going to be Vatican/Catholic, or is rather a creation of the Catholic background, and Vatican basically is behind it? Is that what you see as well, or do you have anything else to add to that or comment on?
Well, Rome is the center of so much, and there's a good reason for that. When these network of interbreeding bloodlines came out of ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, Sumer, Babylon, at least one stream of them, and their priesthood is the secret society network through which they operate, relocated to Rome and created the Roman Empire. Of course, it created the Christian Church. But the Christian Church, the Roman Church, and now the Roman Catholic Church, was the Church of Babylon relocated. And the holy days of the Church of Babylon are the holy days of the Church of Rome, just use different names. The Roman Church Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost is another version of the Babylonian Trinity of Nimrod, Tammuz, the virgin-born son, and Queen Semiramis, Ishtar, the goddess of Babylon. And they symbolized Queen Semiramis in Babylon as a dove, and they symbolized the Holy Ghost in the Christian Trinity as a dove, which is the goddess. And what they also did was take all the attributes that the Babylonians gave to Queen Semiramis, Ishtar, like the Queen of Heaven, Virgin Queen, great, all this stuff, and they gave them to Mother Mary. So the Roman Church is the Church of Babylon. That's what we're looking at. And so it is in many ways, so many ways, the core of it all. And that's why the Jesuits and Opus Dei and all these people are so influential in this whole network of manipulation. Also influential, of course, you've got the Knights of Malta, used to be called the Knights Hospitaller of St. John of Jerusalem, again, allied to Rome. You've got the Knights Templar, again, connected to Rome. And so, yes, that's a massive vortex of control and manipulation. And it's no accident, as you rightly point out, that we have the Treaty of Rome and all these things within the European Union. And London is another major operational centre. But, Rome is massive. And it is a recreation in so many ways of the Roman Empire. Because people don't realise that, the Roman Empire is supposed to be from history, but our very laws are created on the Roman system. You look at the architecture of Washington, D.C., you look at the architecture of major buildings in London, like the Bank of England and so on and so forth, and you're looking at Rome. And Rome never went away. It just changed the way it operated, went underground rather than in your face. And we're actually seeing, Henrik, almost a cycle being completed now, because there was a point where people were rebelling against overt, in-your-face dictatorship, i.e. royal diktat, kings and queens dictating everything. They rebelled about that, and that this was a problem for the control system, the emerging control system. So they had to start to do it another way, and they did it by moving these elite bloodlines, although they kept some in the royal families like we have in Britain, etc. But most of them went into what I call the dark suit professions and introduced this thing called democracy. And they had politicians which appeared to be voting in relation to what people wanted, and they were being elected by people. And then you had the corporations, and you had all these other things, all these dark suit professions of this cabal, and their agents and gophers were running this system. And for a long time, they ran it because they had to, as if people were free, and they equated freedom with democracy, which is just dictatorship by the majority, or even dictatorship by the minority in many countries. And people bought that. But what we're now seeing is the movement getting ever faster to the point where people are beginning to see again, as you know from your program, and I know from traveling the world and talking and researching this, more and more people are beginning to see again, actually, we're being controlled. It's almost like it's a return to, we're not having kings and queens dictating to us just because of their bloodline. And now people are starting to realize, hold on a second, in a different form, that's happening. And so we're seeing the European Union and all these other institutions of power becoming more and more blatant in the fact that that's what they are, dictatorships. And so this Rubicon that's been crossed with this Lisbon Treaty is going to take us into an era very, very soon where vast numbers of people will realize, actually, we're seeing another version of what humanity rejected centuries ago, which is the overt dictatorship by the few of the many. How we respond to that will decide how long it goes on for.
You mentioned, which is interesting, basically how the Roman Church has been built on a previous religion, pretty much.
Right.
They also use the name Europe. Europe, of course, which comes from Europa.
Which is another name for the goddess, another name for Semiramis and the goddess under so many names in different communities and societies, absolutely. We're seeing it re-emerging from behind the shield, from behind the smokescreen.
Because in one way you can look at that, the EU even have, in some cases, statues of Europa riding the bull, Zeus, you know, and in Christian lore, that could be interpreted as the woman who's riding the beast, you know, the harlot. If we look at it from the Bible again, it's Babylon the great, mother of harlots and out of earth's abominations. So in one way you wonder, which one is it then? Is it that she's the bride of the devil or the mother of God here? Who are we talking about? Because if I just show you quickly, you've probably seen these images already. But that's the comparison of the European Parliament and Peter Bruegel's Tower of Babel. And of course, merged together, they look like the same. So are they building the Tower of Babel? Or are they building the Babylonian Empire again? But they're doing that under the guise of Christianity. Or what do you think is going on there?
Well, all the way through this period, from Babylon, Sumer, ancient Egypt, right through the present day, the same network of interbreeding families and bloodlines have been at work. And they've been following the same religion, worshipping the same, quote, gods. It's all been the same stream of belief, of manipulation of families all the way through. But there have been periods where they've had to hide it. And there's periods when they've put it in front of our faces because they were confident enough that they could get away with it. So if you go further back, they were openly displaying their human sacrifice, their idols, their symbols, the whole thing. And then they went through this period where they felt necessary to do it covertly. And what we're seeing now is the re-emergence of putting it in our face. Now, this is happening in two ways. First of all, they're doing that. But secondly, as a result of a tremendous amount of research by people over the last few years, and the internet and books, etc., increasingly vast numbers of people are aware of these symbols, they're aware of the bloodlines, they're aware of the agenda. And what's actually happening, what conspiracy research is actually about, is bringing from the subconscious, the subliminal, to the conscious mind. So if you show someone a subliminal advertisement, for instance, and they look at it, the conscious mind won't see it. Almost everyone's conscious mind won't see it. When you point out where the subliminal is, and then show it them again and again, any time, the first thing they will see is the subliminal they couldn't see before, right? This is the way it works. I mean, it's amazing, but it's the way it works. Because what you've done is you've brought it to conscious awareness. Now, as researchers, etc., have brought these things to public attention, they are bringing them out of the subconscious, out of the subliminal. And so people are seeing these things like they wouldn't have seen them before. So to an extent, they're putting it more and more in our face. But allied with that, people are seeing it more and more. Because a lot of things that were there before, like the Statue of Liberty, which is a classic representation of the goddess of Babylon in the way that she was portrayed, holding the torch, the lighted torch, which was the symbol of Nimrod, the Babylonian father god. And actually, she's actually standing in New York Harbor on a depiction of the sun. So it's all kind of sun-moon symbolism, which is basically the religions of these people, because that's another story. The sun-moon is covertly hiding the real meaning for those symbols. But so people are seeing it more, and will go on doing so, because these families are seeking to impose a global Roman Empire and a global Babylonian Empire, if you like, and therefore the symbols that they will use will be the symbols they've always used, and that's where it's becoming more blatant to people as they become more aware of what's going on.
If we look at some of the more obvious symbolism of the European Union, if we look at the flag then, for instance, again, we have the 12 stars in the flag. Do you think that that's an astrological / zodiacal reference? Is it a Catholic reference with the Mother Mary and her 12 stars around her head? Or if we take it further, do you think could it be like the 12 lost tribes of Israel? Is it a Zionist reference here as well? What do you think?
Well, people use symbols for different reasons, and they can have different meanings for the same symbol. But what is blatantly clear is that the 12 stars in a circle are an ancient symbol of the goddess. So, in the book of Revelation, which you can read in the Bible, you've got the 12 stars around the goddess figure. And the story that's told, cover story, is that there was a gentleman who was involved well before the European Union and the European community became established, who was involved in the background early administration of the whole process of introducing it, who was walking along and looked up, and he saw a statue of Mother Mary, and he looked up and he saw the stars around her head, and it was a clear blue sky, and he looked up and he saw the stars and the clear blue sky and said, that must be the symbol of the European Union. And he went along and he said it to his associates, and they said, that's a good idea. And we're asked to believe that. It's a blatant symbol of at least on one level, the goddess figure. And, the symbolism you've mentioned of the goddess Europa riding the bull. Well, the bull is the god figure. It's the Nimrod figure. And you've got commemorative coins being minted by the European Union over the years. There was one in 2005 to 2006, something like that, which has Europa riding the bull. I mean, ancient esoteric occult ritual symbols are all over the place, because these families are that are behind the European Union, were behind the Babylonian Empire, the Roman Empire. It's a continuation. It's not something new. It just changes the mask on its face as it moves through history.
Also, you mentioned Rothschild as being behind the creation of the European Union as well. And actually, yesterday I found an interesting thing regarding Rothschild. They said this: in 1954, Baron Robert Rothschild was appointed chef de cabinet of Paul Henry Spaak at the Belgian Foreign Ministry. For the next 2 years, he worked together with Spaak and, maybe butchering his name here, Jean-Charles Snoy et de Oppers, or something like that, on the Treaty of Rome. Before the final signing of the treaty in 1957, shortly before the treaty was signed, Rothschild standing beside Spaak, gazing over the Forum Romanum in Rome, when Spaak said, "I think that we have re-established the Roman Empire without a single shot being fired." Anything you want to comment in regards to that?
Exactly what they've done. Like I say, they want a global Roman Empire. The Rothschilds are fundamental to this. They are a family that were once called the Bowers, who were a notorious, if you say, black magic, occult, secret society type family, who changed their name to Rothschild, Red Shield. And from that time, they grasped control of the now global economic system. They control all global finance, virtually, that has any effect on people's lives anyway. And they operate as if not the spider, then the operational organization of the spider. They are the people that are closest to the spider and at the center of this global secret society web, and they hand out the agenda and make sure it's played out through the web in every country. And so they don't just control the financial level, they control the corporations, and they control governments, and they are also the guiding, controlling force behind a network of organizations which were spawned from a secret society started in Britain in the late 19th century called the Round Table. And the offshoot satellite organizations of this central core Rothschild-controlled secret society, the Round Table, they started off in 1920 with the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Watch the think tanks. Look how the world is awash with think tanks, right? The think tanks are the means through which this whole thing is orchestrated overwhelmingly. So you have a think tank called the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London. A year later, 1921, Council on Foreign Relations, which dominates United States foreign policy and the State Department in America, etc. Then you had the Club of Rome, I think that was 1968, that was set up to manipulate the environment and the environmental movement to justify global transformation. And this is where the lie of human-caused climate change has come from. 1954, you had the Bilderberg Group, and then in 1973, you had the Trilateral Commission, which was co-created by David Rockefeller, and the Rockefellers are a subordinate bloodline within the network to the Rothschilds. They represent the Rothschilds in America, the wider world too, but especially America. And the other co-creator of the Trilateral Commission was Zbigniew Brzezinski, President Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, who is one of the prime mentors of Barack Obama, who's just another, mask on the same face that as Bush was. And the Bilderberg Group is very, very important in the creation and the centralization of power within the European Union. For people who are new to these organizations, what they are is coordinating networks to coordinate a common policy, a common view among different countries, different people in banks, people in government, people in NATO, people in intelligence agencies. It's to create a coordination of view and of policy. And the Bilderberg Group has been one of the prime manipulators of the policy of the of centralization of power in Europe. It's been from 1954, one of its prime motives has been to create the European Union as we now have. And it's very obvious and blatant that what we're seeing now was planned from the start. You know, we have a situation where Russian dissidents who've come out of the old Soviet Union are describing the European Union, quite rightly, as a mirror in structure of the Soviet Union with the Politburo, etc. And some of them, one of them in particular, tells the story of having seen reports or official reports of a meeting that Mikhail Gorbachev had when he was the leader of the Soviet Union, with David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger from the Trilateral Commission and Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, where in the middle of the conversation, d'Estaing said, Mr. President, this is what's going to happen within a certain number of years. In other words, what's happening now with the Treaty of Lisbon, the Lisbon Treaty, is going to happen in Europe, and it's going to happen in this period of years. So basically, you better get used to it. Now, what's interesting is two things. First of all, if France and the Netherlands had not voted no to the original constitution, then d'Estaing's timescale would have been virtually exact what he said, the number of years hence that this was going to come in. It's only been delayed because of those referendums, which meant they had to go through the process of going from a constitution to a treaty and all the rest of it. The other interesting thing is the person who oversaw the writing of the constitution was Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. So, Bilderberg Group, by the way. And we had a guy in the UK who was a practicing Satanist and serial child killer. I said that in my books when he was alive, no comeback because it's true, called Ted Heath. Ted Heath was Prime Minister of Britain from 1970 to 74, and he was the man who signed us into the European community and knowing what it was going to be. And he was one of the obsessive campaigners for us to go in right through the 60s. We have in Britain something called the 30-year rule, where cabinet papers are released after 30 years. Some of them are not released then because of national security, in other words, security of the agenda. But what came out in the 30-year rule in terms of Ted Heath is he had agreed, while denying it in public, to the rundown of the British fishing industry, the rundown of British agriculture, the rundown of manufacturing industry, right at the start. We're talking the early 1970s, because, again, what is happening was planned from the start. They have had this whole plan of turning the whole of Europe into effect a single unit. So before all these unions came in, you would have a country, and this part of the country would be the coal mining if they had coal resources. This part would be industry. This part would do that. This part would do that. Different parts of the country specialise in different things. So the plan has been to do that to Europe. So right from the start, amazing but true, they were dictating which parts of Europe would specialise in what. So they decided that places like, Germany would do this and that, but Britain, that would concentrate on service industries like insurance and banking and finance, and that therefore, because agriculture and industry and stuff like that was going to specialise elsewhere, in Britain all those things were going to be run down. And so while people in Britain and every other country were seeing these kind of changes in the way the country was, like through the Margaret Thatcher era, through the 80s, that Conservative government absolutely targeted, on purpose, blatantly, knowingly, at the core level, the coal industry in Britain. So we don't have a coal industry now. And we are an island, and yet our fishing industry is being decimated by European Union law. And so what people have perceived over the decades of the European Union as their countries changing and thinking, why is it happening? Now it's clear why. It was all being prepared for where we are. The idea is to break the countries of Europe up into regions, because the idea is to de-unify any unification of response to the edifice of power above. Now, if you look around the world, whether it's the family, whether it's any grouping that can pull people together as a unit, and in a unified way, a unified response, they're being targeted. And one of those unification forces is a sense of nation, a sense of country. So what we're seeing, not just in Europe, but blatantly in Europe, is the bringing down of borders. For what? For what reason? Same in America, it's happening. So that people from other cultures can pour into other cultures, and people from this culture can pour into that culture. Now, on the face of it, people might say, and I might agree with them, well, you know, we're all kind of just human beings. But if we're going to be streetwise, we need to understand not just what's happening, but why it's happening. And why it's happening on one key level is the plan is to destroy any sense of nation, any sense of unique culture. I'm now seeing articles, and I have been for a while in British newspapers, saying, what is it to be British anymore? You know, is it eggs and bacon for breakfast? I mean, is it fish and chips? What is it to be British anymore? What's it mean? And that's the idea. The idea is to break down any of that. And I don't say that from a nationalistic point of view, because I don't actually recognise myself as British. I'm just consciousness having an experience. I mean, you can stick all the other labels. I'm not interested. But if we're going to be streetwise, we have to see what is happening from the perspective and the intended outcome of those that are doing it. And this is all part of destroying a sense of uniqueness in any way. So you've got this great blob mentality that we call Europe. And if you've got a real strong sense of nation, this is why they're doing the same game big time on the United States, which at one point had a massive sense of nation and what it was. If you've got a sense of nation, then when things are suggested that break your nation up into regions, that take your ability to govern yourselves to an outside agency, if you've got a sense of nationhood, we're American, we're British, we're not having this, break that up, people go much more quietly. And that's the idea. They want to, and the other interesting thing is some of the maps that have come to light that have been in British newspapers from time to time over the years, they don't just turn Britain into a series of regions, but they take this region of Britain and they clump it together in a regional group with a region in France and a region in Scandinavia. Again, all deunifying. So the only unified force in the entire structure are the bureaucrats sitting around a table at the centre. That's the idea. It's being done mercilessly and has been unfolding for decades, because the blueprint was there right from the start.
A ruthless human being is more easily controlled. It's easy as that. Although everyone might not identify, as you say, with their nation or with their culture even, that is at least one fundamental point in many people's lives, and when they take that away, then it's much easier to control that human being, obviously.
Exactly, that's the idea.
Joining of Israel into the European Union, there have been talks of them joining as well, and which might again allude to the Zionist connection to the European Union and Israel. Because Kudnov-Kalergi apparently had well, if you want to term the very racist views in terms of how he viewed the Jewish race as supreme to the rest of the European people and so forth. Do you think that's the case? Do you think they go hand in hand? We talked about the Rome connection, obviously, but in terms of Zionism, if we look at that from one thing, are those separate, or do they go hand in hand, Rome and Israel, or Zionists?
They're all connected, and they're connected through the House of Rothschild. See, if people just took a breath and looked at the whole scene, they would ask a series of questions. Why does that slither of land called Israel, and I've driven around it, and you can virtually drive around it in a day, why does that have so much power? Why is it the biggest, by far, recipient of American aid when it is one of the richest per capita countries in the world? Why does it have the biggest F-16 fleet outside America? How come it can have a very considerable arsenal of nuclear weapons, refuse to sign a non-proliferation treaty, and have a breathtaking agreement, which has just been confirmed by Barack Obama in the last few months, that they have a policy in terms of America and other countries and Israel, that they don't ask whether they've got nuclear weapons, and therefore Israel doesn't have to say if they have or not. This is an official policy. Why, when they pepper bomb the most crowded piece of land in the world and instigate slaughter on a shocking scale, does the international community, apart from one or two people, say nothing? Simple. The House of Rothschild controls Israel. It created Israel. And more than that, it created a political philosophy. Note, a political philosophy called Zionism. What they've brilliantly done, though it's breaking down, is they have equated Jewish people as a race with Zionism, which is a political philosophy. And at its core is a secret society, connects into the other secret societies. And so if you challenge Zionism and its horrors and its impositions and its hypocrisy and its slaughter, you are equated with being prejudiced against Jewish people. What they don't tell you is significant numbers of Jewish people actually are appalled by Zionism and actually openly protest against it. And there's some fantastic young people in Israel that refuse to serve in the military and end up in jail because of it. And, you know, they are incredible people to have that sense of value. The questions that I've just posed can be answered very, very easily. The House of Rothschild control American politics. They control the neocons that controlled Bush. They control what I call the democons that control Obama. And in the White House, as I speak, we have the White House Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel, who is the puppeteer, immediate puppeteer of Obama, and his father actually served in an Israeli Zionist terror group called Irgun, which, with others, bombed Israel into existence and forced 750 to 800,000 Palestinians to leave their homeland after 1948. The reason, therefore, that Israel is the biggest recipient of American aid and military support is because this hand, called the House of Rothschild, takes the money from the United States and hands it to this hand, called Israel, of the House of Rothschild, and says, thank you very much. The reason that there's no questioning of Israeli nuclear capability, that they get away literally with mass murder time and time again, is because the House of Rothschild also controls the countries of the European Union and controls the European Union. I mean, Tony Blair is a yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, how high would you like me to jump sir, frontman for the House of Rothschild. So who do they put in after he left the British government as negotiator of peace in Israel? Tony bloody Blair. What shall I say, Mr. Rothschild? Thank you very much. Thank you. That's thank you. And that's it. So when you've got the same force controlling all these different agencies, then of course they're going to be coordinated. That's why Israel gets away with what it gets away with. And if people think that's anti-Semitic, well, actually anti-Semitic means anti-Arab, by the way, then they'll have to take it and shove it somewhere where the sun don't shine. Because I ain't shutting up about this, because it's fundamental to understanding the world and to understanding the European Union and world events. The Jewish people, in general, have been mercilessly used by the House of Rothschild and their front secret society, satanic secret society called Zionism, as a front which they can hide behind. So it is House of Rothschild organizations like B'nai B'rith, Sons of the Covenant, who created an organization called the Anti-Defamation League, which goes around defaming everyone, ironically, who have not just campaigned for hate laws that stop you exposing these people, they've actually written the bloody legislation in America, in North America, and Canada. And so these hate laws, which say you can't say this, you can't say that because that's prejudicial, they're not there to protect gay people. Everyone to their own, I say. I can care less. They're not there to protect Jewish people or minorities. They're there simply to stop legitimate investigation of the Rothschilds and its network. That's what they're there for. And they are in so many ways, the Rothschilds, at operational level, the center of the spider's web. And they need to be exposed, because if they get exposed and they go, when I say go, they are removed from their positions of power. Because, to be honest, if they went to jail for what they have been responsible for, the House of Rothschild, they would have to reincarnate hundreds of times to complete the sentence. And we've ignored them, or we've not ignored them. People have ignored their power for long enough because they've brilliantly hidden it. It needs the light shone on it, because when they come down, in so many ways, the house of cards comes down. Thank you very much.